Welcome everybody, this is Niclas Huschenbeth and today I would like to share with you the very last game Garry Kasparov played in his classical chess career. And that game was all the way back in 2005. He faced Veselin Topalov in the 14th round of the Linares Super Tournament with the black pieces. So let's get to it. But before we begin, I would like to read out to you the comment of today. The comment of today was by Sam the Bold, and he said, "Loved you explaining your preparation and variations. You showed were very interesting and educational." Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Sam. And now let's get to the game. So what was the situation in the tournament? Kasparov was leading by 1 point, 1 full point ahead of Topalov, and he had the better tiebreak. So even if Topalov was to win this game, it was clear that Kasparov would still win the tournament on the tiebreaks. And before this game, nobody besides Kasparov himself and some of his close friends knew that this would be his last game. So Kasparov, of course, put immense pressure on himself because he knew, well, this is my last game. I want to do well. Obviously, I don't want to end with a loss. So we have to keep this in mind while seeing this game. Alright, so let's begin. And by the way, to the left of the board you see the engine bar, and that tells you who has the advantage at the moment. So if the white bar gets bigger, then white has a bigger advantage and vice versa. Now let us begin. Topalov starts with e4, c5, knight f3. It is the Sicilian, and Topalov goes for the anti-Sveshnikov here, knight c3. Kasparov went e5, so we don't see an open Sicilian here. Bishop c4, d6, d3, bishop to e7. Bishop e7 is the typical development move here. Why start with the bishop and not the knight to f6? Well, one typical maneuver is to go knight d2, knight f1, knight d3 to get to this important square here on d5, a very nice outpost for the knights. And the point is that after knight d2, black can go bishop g5 now and exchange these two bishops, which is something black would like to do as the dark squared bishop is limited by black's own pawns in this position. Here Topalov went castle, now knight f6, knight h4, knight to d4. You might wonder for a moment, why not knight takes e4? This is a typical tactic, winning a pawn, but of course both players saw this. After bishop takes h4, white can go f4 and he develops a strong initiative, ready to open up the f-file, put some pressure on his pawn on f7, and white has very good compensation for the pawn. So Kasparov went knight d4 instead, now g3. Bishop g4 provoking f3, and the bishop returns to e6. Bishop g5, and now we see what I was just talking about. Black goes knight g8 to exchange the dark squared bishops. Takes f4. Now e takes f4, bishop takes e6, f takes e6, rook takes f4. And here Kasparov plays a very nice move, I think. You can see he cannot castle right now as the rook is covering the f8 square. And he decides to get his king to safety by playing king d7. An unusual move. Usually people castle, obviously, but the king feels pretty safe on d7, and Kasparov wants to prepare fighting for the only open file in this position, the f-file. So this is something you also want to do in your own games. When there's an open file, try to fight for it, put your rooks on it, and that's what black is about to do here. Now knight f3. Also, by the way, black is threatening to fork the rook and the knight right now. This wasn't possible in this position because after g5, white can go queen h5 with check and then pick up the pawn on g5. So king d7 threatening g5, white goes knight f3, rook f8, takes, knight takes d4, c takes d4, the knight retreats to e2, now attacking the pawn on d4, which is why black goes queen f6, also preparing to get his rook into a game. And white went c3, a move which has two objectives. For one, white wants to get rid of this slightly annoying pawn on d4, and for the other, he wants to bring out the queen. maybe to b3, maybe to a4, and cause some trouble for the black king here, which is not, well, perfectly placed in the center. Obviously would be much better, for example, on h8 or g8. But Kasparov responded in a good way. He played rook f8, just ignoring this c3 move. If he was to take on c3, then queen a4 check, knight c6, everything happens with tempo. Rook f1 attacking the queen, queen drops back, and now b takes c3, and this position is maybe a tiny bit more pleasant for white, even though not too much has happened, obviously. But rook f8 is strong. This is the game, rook f8, knight takes d4, and now knight to c6. Trying to exchange the knights, and Topalov responded by queen f1, and this is a typical technique. If you are material up, you want to exchange pieces. So that is the heavy pieces, queens and rooks, and also the minor pieces, knights and bishops. And when you're material down, you actually want to exchange pawns. Why pawns? Well, with every pawn that's getting exchanged, the draw becomes a more likely result. You just have to think about, well, if I just have king and bishop left against the king, it's a draw. Or even if I have king and two knights left against the king, it's still a draw. So with every pawn being exchanged, a draw becomes more likely. Now Kasparov plays queen takes f1, which is a mistake. He could have pretty much forced a draw here by taking on d4. Now white has to exchange on f6, otherwise black just takes back on d4 with check and wins the queen. So queen takes f6, rook takes, c takes d4, and white is pawn up here in the endgame. But after rook f3, rook d1, g5, this is an important move. And we see why here. Black can cement his rook on f3, and now white is just stuck. The king is kind of in a cage, and the rook has to defend the pawn on d3. So there's nothing white can do, and his extra pawn doesn't count for anything. This would have been a pretty easy way to make a draw here. Black has also other moves available, for example queen d8, with the idea of bringing the queen to b6, but if black wants to make a draw, he should just play knight takes d4. Queen takes f1 is a mistake, and it makes black's life much more difficult. Rook takes, king takes, and this was Garry's plan. He wanted to go into the pawn endgame here. He now went knight takes d4. But also, well, if he plays knight e5, his position would be also very difficult, probably lost. The pawn endgame isn't lost, but it's very dangerous for black. White is a pawn up. The pawn is a double pawn, but this still matters. So let's see how this continues. Well, let me first say one thing about pawn endgames. In your own games, you want to be very sure before you enter a pawn endgame, because there are just three results. There's no slightly better or clearly better. It's either win, draw, or loss. So you want to be sure that whatever outcome you desire is actually correct in the pawn game. And you want to calculate quite well, right? So this is important to consider before entering these endgames. Now d5, king f2, king e7, the king comes forward, and so does the black king. And this is a critical moment in the game. White went h4, and here black could still hold it, but he only had one move, and this is not easy to see at all. And even for one of the greatest players of all time, if not the greatest, Garry Kasparov, he could not find it. And also considering, of course, the specific situation for this game, it's not surprising. He played g6, but he had to move the h pawn, one forward, h6, and it seems that the black position is a fortress and cannot be broken eventually. I could go now on lots and lots of variations, but I'll spare you that. If you want to, you can analyze this pawn game on your own. So let's see how this game concluded. g6, b4, b5, king f4, h6, and now king g4, and here Kasparov resigned. Why did he resign? Well, this is actually a position of what is so-called reciprocal Zugzwang, or mutual Zugzwang, I should say, I think. It's either one. What does that mean? Well, if either side is to move, it is Zugzwang. And what is Zugzwang? Well, Zugzwang means that with every move you make, you worsen your position. And in black's case, well, with every move he makes, he just loses pretty much. So why is it Zugzwang for white? Let's figure this out. If white was to move right now, which he is not, and he would go a3, then actually here he cannot make progress. After h5, black just plays g5, and after king f4, black can go g5 check, take, take, king g4 and king g6, and this is also a draw. So let's see the difference. Black was to move in the game. Kasparov resigned, but let's just see how this could have played out. King f7, and the difference is that after h5, if we now play g5, then white can go e takes d5, e takes d5, and now as the king is not on f6, white can bring the king to f5, and he's just ready to pick up this pawn on d5 and win. So there's nothing really for black to do. He can also take on h5, but white just brings the pawn forward, and now once again takes on d5, goes to f5, goes to e5, picks up this pawn d5, has two passed pawns, and this is of course decisive in a pawn endgame. So Garry Kasparov resigned in this position, still won the tournament, the Linares Super Tournament 2005, but of course he probably most likely wished his last game to go a little bit different, but he was, as he also said in the press conference, not really fully there, and this explains why he played the way he did. Also, I recommend you to check out the press conference right after a game. You find the link in the description where Kasparov renounced his retirement to the journalists, to the world, and if you are interested in that, I recommend you to check it out. Also, in the description you find a link to a game if you want to play through it yourself or analyze it by yourself. I would definitely, well, you can definitely do that. It's not bad for your chess improvement. And then I thank you for watching, and I'm also curious how you like the new design with everything, the engine evaluation and all of that. And I'm looking forward for your comments. All right, see you guys soon. Bye bye.